Hello, and welcome to this AGU Pathfinder webinar, Building Successful Mentoring Relationships as a Mentor, featuring Dr. Donna Charlevoix and Dr. Aisha Morris of UNAVCO. My name is Leslie Marasco, and I'll be your host today. I'm the Student Programs Coordinator here at AGU. First off, just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in the right side control panel, and we'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. And finally, the link to the online recording of this webinar will be sent to all webinar attendees in a follow-up email within the next couple days. Presenting today's webinar is Dr. Donna Charlevoix and Dr. Aisha Morris. Donna is the Director of Education and Community Engagement for UNAVCO, the National Science Foundation facility for research and education using geodesy. At UNAVCO, Donna is responsible for overseeing professional development for scientists, students, and educators, and all workforce activities, including 3 internship programs and faculty mentoring programs. Aisha is an education specialist and the director of the research experiences in solid earth science for the student internship program managed by UNAVCO. In her current position, Aisha is responsible for UNAVCO's Geo Workforce Development Initiative, including managing undergraduate, graduate student internship programs and supporting early career professionals as they transition into the geoscience workforce. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Donna and Aisha. Take it away.
Thank you, Leslie. Hi, this is Aisha, and I just wanted to familiarize you with my voice.
And this is Donna. Aisha and I are going to be tag teaming a little bit today. And we're really pleased that you could join us for today's webinar, where we're going to talk about building successful mentoring relationships as a mentor.
All right. So the first question we have for you is actually a poll question. And we'd like to know what you think it means to be a mentor. And if you could just type in your answers into the question box, or I believe it's the question box where you'll type it in, and Leslie will give us some of that feedback.
So on the right-hand side, you'll see a question box, and you can just type in what you think it is to be a mentor. So we got a couple things coming in. Someone says it's support and guidance. Someone else says to guide and facilitate or be a facilitator. Also, it's about caring. And so you can serve as a guide and support someone through their journey. Also to help someone transition, how to learn to be independent as a scientist. And again, we have some caring, guidance, and also to help development. And let's do just one more. Well, molding a mini-me. So those are just a couple. If you guys want to tell us what you think it means to be a mentor.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, well, so those are actually all great responses and all things that I think we would also categorize as being a mentor. So let's go to our friends Merriam and Webster and look at how they define a mentor, and basically an experienced or trusted advisor. And I think a lot of people, a lot of you that are on the webinar today may have been serving in a mentoring capacity and maybe not even really realized it. There are a lot of ways that we interact with colleagues or with students, and we're going to try to have a wide breadth here in our discussion and not assume that everyone is just in academia. But as we're thinking about mentoring, it is important to think about some of the different interactions that we would have with students or with our colleagues or early career professionals. And so one thing to think about, and when we work with faculty, we try to really articulate this, but it's, I think, worth thinking a little bit about the term mentoring versus advising or instruction or sponsoring. And so mentoring is typically a two-way relationship between a more experienced and a less experienced individual, and that assists with professional and personal growth. Advising is a little bit more narrow. That's an exchange of information designed to help a person meet career or educational goals. Of course, instruction we're all very familiar with. That's where we're actually trying to help a student learn information. And another term that hopefully you're familiar with, but you may not have heard used quite as frequently, is sponsoring. And sponsorship is where a coaching or advocate relationship is intentional in connecting individuals to networks of people and resources. So these are all ways to think about our interactions with students or colleagues. And what we're going to focus on today is the mentoring aspects. So how are we going to define mentoring for this discussion? So we're going to actually draw on some things that we talked about last week with mentees.
So we talked a little bit about different components that may have some aspects of mentoring involved in them. One of the things to keep in mind is that although there's a whole lot of scholarship on mentoring, the definition is not consistent across the board. And there are many ways that you can mentor depending on your given situation. But in general, a more experienced person is helping guide a less experienced person and really reaching their potential. And somebody kind of mentioned that earlier when they said that they're helping someone develop. So I think that's an important component of mentoring, guiding and facilitating. So you guys are already thinking along the correct lines. And the Institute for Broadening Participation has a website called Pathways to Science. And the definition that they have there is mentoring is about helping a mentee develop social capital in an environment where they have the resources and support to develop technical and intellectual capital. So again, someone mentioned developing into an independent scientist. That's another part of mentoring. But what is this social capital that we're talking about?
So that's an excellent question, Aisha. Social capital is something that all of us gain or acquire and spend, and we probably don't even realize it. So you can think of it kind of like a currency. And the way that you gain this currency or this capital is primarily through networking and through interactions with peers, potential colleagues, current colleagues. And it's a way that people can use social capital to gain access. So you can think about meeting different people at conferences or interacting with people at various meetings, and those relationships and that information that you acquire can be drawn on later in order to do other activities. So it's a way of kind of advancing our own professional careers through primarily interactions with individuals. So the other thing that I just want to really emphasize is that a mentor is really genuinely interested in their mentee's growth and success. And I think that, that's why you're all here, because you're really interested in learning more about mentoring, because you really want to help your mentees succeed. And since this is largely a very scientific crowd and we like to have evidence for what it is that we're doing, we wanted to share just a little bit of the kind of historic scholarship on mentoring. And as Aisha pointed out earlier, it's not really well defined. And if you go back into the literature, especially looking at mentoring relationships between academics and students, really the seminal study was back in the late 70s by Levinson, where they queried many colleagues at many different universities. And the observation in higher education is that mentoring was, quote, limited and poor in quality. And some of the mentoring functions from a later study are shown there in table 2. And if you just kind of take a look through that, you can see that the things that fall underneath their mentoring functions, we would maybe think of them more as instruction or advising. And so this is where there's kind of a gray area. Mentoring is very widely defined. And the reason that we want to bring this up is that it's a little bit fluid, and it's important not to get too hung up on definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about mentoring relationships and how often there are more than one mentoring relationships for a mentee. And as a mentor, you may have multiple mentees. We'll talk a little bit about the structure of mentoring relationships, which can vary quite a bit, and also the duration of particular mentoring relationships. So the other thing that we would like to get a little bit of information about is your experiences in mentoring. So there's a poll that we have here, and I think that Leslie will have a way for you to respond here. If you've mentored, what was your motivation?
So just take a couple seconds and make your selection for what has motivated you in the past to mentor. And we're going to close out the poll in 3, 2, and 1. So it looks like an overwhelming majority, 85% of people with us today said their motivation was the desire to help others. The next highest was at 7%, which is to build relationships, and then at 4%, there's both for personal satisfaction and also another 4% for required for their job or position.
Great, thank you. Well, those are great responses and not particularly surprising in that the benefits of mentoring, or why people mentor, the primary reason is that people mentor because of the personal satisfaction that they gain from those mentoring relationships. Other benefits that you receive from mentoring someone is re-energizing your career. Oftentimes, mentoring relationships are established when someone is, a mentor is established in their own career, they're kind of mid-career or late early career, and you have your network down, you have your professional requirements and work down, and it's really a new way to look at the work that you're doing and kind of re-energize your own day-to-day responsibilities. There's a lot of opportunity in mentoring as well, and I think that sometimes we don't really think about this when we're mentoring different individuals. It's really a nice opportunity to reflect on your own practice, and here by practice I mean kind of what it is that you're doing day to day in your professional career, and what might you do different based on some of the conversations that you've had with your mentor. It's another opportunity to practice active listening, and if you're not familiar with that term, it's really a way of being in the moment, in the conversation, really listening to what the other person is saying and reflecting on that and thinking about what they're saying, as opposed to thinking about how you're going to respond to what it is that they're saying. And that's something that many people have to practice because it's not always easy to do. Other benefits that people have received from mentoring are strengthening your skills in interpersonal relationships. A lot of us that go into science maybe are not the most extroverted persons, and so sometimes conversations about different topics can be challenging, and this is a really great opportunity in a smaller setting, one person, one-on-one, to practice some of those skills. Sharing your own knowledge increases your sense of self-worth. It's really great if you're having a conversation with someone and they're genuinely interested in your opinion and what it is that you're doing, and you walk away from those conversations feeling like you have made a difference, which goes back to that first bullet of personal satisfaction. And the other thing that is really quite important is to get insight into what's happening with another generation. Now, not always is a mentor-mentee relationship intergenerational, but a lot of times if you're in an academic setting, you're mentoring students or younger individuals, graduate students, maybe postdocs. But even as you are older in your career and you're maybe more senior level person, you might be mentoring a junior level person. And it is always interesting and helpful to see how they're perceiving workplace environment and broader social issues that might influence your work.
Okay, great. And so I think I just want to mention 85% of you said that you desire to help others, and that was why you were mentoring. And I think it's important to remember the benefits for the people that you are mentoring. And that desire to help others is rooted in actual documented results for mentees. So some of the benefits of mentoring for people who are being mentored are things like the people have a more robust toolbox for navigating the academic environment and other situations, really understanding how do you manage different situations. And they are learning that from their mentors. Another benefit is that people who have had mentoring relationships tend to be more successful in finding jobs, career placements, and often have higher income levels and promotion rates. So you're developing this person as a professional and on a personal level, and that's being played out by, the result is a good job and more money. Who doesn't want that? But you're also helping students increase their knowledge about balancing multiple aspects of life. So many of us have multiple demands, professional and personal, and navigating how you balance those can be challenging. And so mentees can benefit from your expertise on how you've handled situations or not handled situations properly, and learn from that, and hopefully, not make the same mistakes. Mentees often, particularly students, have higher GPAs and a higher likelihood of graduation. So a student who's been in a mentoring relationship is going to be able to be more successful academically. And then through that mentoring relationship, show enhanced professional skill development, which is fantastic as they're looking for those jobs and getting those career placements. And if we're thinking about academics, mentees tend to be more efficient and productive in graduate school. You want a productive graduate student, so good mentoring has benefits. And also developing a bigger network. It's always good for mentors to introduce their mentees to their own personal network. Again, this goes back to that social capital. Developing that social capital enables them to have a stronger, more robust network and genuinely be happier in their field, because they do feel like they have a place and they feel like they have a role in the field. So we mentioned earlier the different types of mentoring relationships as far as how you structure the relationship. It kind of ranges from unstructured, more informal, all the way through to a very formalized arrangement that may involve a mentoring agreement or a specific time frame, or something along those lines. So you might want to have a discussion early on where your mentoring relationship should fall on the spectrum, because depending on how the mentoring relationship started, that may have a lot of influence on how you end up interacting farther down the road. For example, if you are at a meeting and you're participating in, say, the GSA Onto the Future or the AGU Fall Meeting Mentoring, you may have a very structured, formalized mentoring arrangement where you say, I'm going to mentor you for this meeting, and at the end of the meeting, make an agreement whether or not there'll be further contact. Or it may be much more unstructured, someone who you've met in a less formal setting, and you end up building a mentoring relationship through your interactions.
And in addition to the spectrum of formality for mentoring relationships, the other thing that's important to keep in mind is the duration. So, if you've signed up to be a mentor or provide some mentoring at the AGU Fall Meeting, that mentoring relationship oftentimes is very short. It's kind of one meeting, you provide some guidance, you have a genuine interest in the person that you're talking with. Mentoring relationships can span, any length of time almost, from a very short period of time, days or weeks, to months and sometimes years. Typically not multiple years in durations in a specific capacity. So as Aisha said, you might have a conversation and talk about what is the mentee you want to get out of this mentoring relationship. And typically when those goals are met, that particular relationship would end, but you sometimes find that you have a very good connection with a mentee, and you may continue that mentoring role for a longer time period, but maybe the focus of that relationship has changed a little bit.
Yes. So let's think a little bit about your experiences again. And we have a quick poll for you. What has been your biggest challenge in being a mentor? And the options are finding time, finding the right mentee, other, or I've been a mentor but not had challenges, or I've not been a mentor.
So just take a couple seconds if you can make your selection. And we're closing the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, this is a little more spread out with the results. So finding time is the most selected option, which is at 48%, and other challenge is at 37%. So actually, those of you that selected other, if you can type into the question box right now what some of those other challenges are, so maybe we can address those. The next highest is not applicable. I've never been a mentor, so that's actually great. We have a lot of people who are interested in serving as a mentor that are attending today. And then 4% said that finding the right mentee has been a challenge. So if any of you that had other, if you could just type that into the question box right now. Someone said that the differences in personality, style, and expectation. And that is so far the only response we've gotten. So I don't know if Aisha and Donna, you want to touch on that? Oh, a bunch just came in. So the structured mentorship program, so the mentee maybe doesn't have an interest or a genuine interest in the specific program or maybe the structure, how to be effective with changing situations, how to adapt, maybe reciprocal motivations between the mentee. Again, we have some repeats about personality, also challenges with computer access or space, communication styles, so lots of things.
Great.
Thank you for your participation.
Great. Well, this is fantastic. I also would like to actually acknowledge that option D, which is I've been a mentor but have not had challenges. We had no one select that. And so that's not terribly surprising because there's often challenges in everything that we do. So the number one thing that people responded to was finding time and finding the right mentee, personality, communication, styles, motivations. Those are all challenges that many people encounter. And so what we want to do for the next couple of slides is talk about maybe some ways that you can develop some tools to help deal with some of those particular challenges. So we've got a short list here for tips on being an effective mentor. So one of the probably the most important thing is to have a good match between the mentor and mentee. And that's where some of you said, you know, there's challenges with personality or style or interest. And so it's really important to have a conversation up front with your mentee and try and understand what it is that the mentee is hoping to gain from the relationship. And from that, you can determine whether or not you might be the best person to mentor them. So it's really important to have that conversation so that it gives you the opportunity to say, yes, this is fantastic. We should talk about this. I have some ideas. I'd love to hear other challenges that you're having. Or for the opportunity for you to say, you know, I understand what you're looking for. I don't know if I'm the best person to do that. And perhaps help them find another mentor. So we're going to talk in a little bit about intentional mentoring, and that kind of all comes back to making sure that you have a good mentor-mentee match. Other things to think about is, you know, how do you do your work and how do you organize your life on a regular basis? And what's going to be the best way for you to interact with this mentee? it's possible that even if you have a mentee who's in the same geographic location, it may be really difficult for you to meet with that person face to face. And so having a more virtual or, via email or even text message or phone conversation may be the best way to interact, because one of the things that you want to do is you want to set your mentoring relationship up for success. And so if you're the kind of person that really has a challenging time meeting someone at a particular time of day or in person, you shouldn't try to change who you are and the way that you work in an effective way in order to accommodate a mentoring relationship. We'll talk a little bit more also about setting boundaries. That's really important to identify what it is that your mentoring relationship is going to encompass. Advocating for your mentee is really important, because what that often does is it not only sets the mentee up for success, but it helps you network as well by talking to others about your mentee, about maybe researching some other resources that you were not aware of, but that you might have access to that your mentee may not. And so those are all things that will, if you put those things in place, it will actually help make the mentoring relationship a little bit easier. And I mentioned a couple of times to be intentional, and intentional mentoring is really, really important. And it's not just, there's actually some structure around intentional mentoring that Aisha was going to share with everyone.
All right, yes. So intentional mentoring is really important if you want to have a relationship that's effective in meeting the goals of what the mentee is really looking for. So in order to meet goals, you need to know what those expectations are. So what are your roles? You'll want to know what you're working toward, and you'll want to know what is expected of you and what you are expecting of your mentee. So I kind of intertwine the first two, the role expectations and the goal clarification, but it's really important to do both of those to make sure exactly what it is you're working toward and how you're going to do it. So that goes into the frequency of contact and the duration of the relationships. We've talked about this a little bit previously. How often do you plan on communicating? How are you going to communicate? And there's a responsibility on both sides, but I think it's important to, again, set that expectation at the beginning and establish the norms for your interactions. How long is the relationship going to be? Donna mentioned earlier that some relationships are days to weeks to months. Few are as long as years, but you can have relationships that are years long, but the goals may evolve. It's important to take a moment to kind of evaluate where you are periodically. How satisfied are you meeting the goals? Are the expectations being met? What might you have to do or adjust to get back on track if things have gone slightly off course? So do a periodic evaluation and course correction as needed. In terms of matching concerns, what is it that you are really working toward? What is it you need to do, and make sure those actually align with the mentor and the mentee. And also boundaries. Boundaries are very important. You want to establish what it is that you'll cover, what it is that will be beyond the boundary of that mentoring relationship. And if there are things that come up, I have an idea of where you might be able to get or point the mentee toward to address whatever that is. That's beyond the boundaries of your mentoring relationship. And then just in general, how do you structure the mentorship? Again, are we having a very informal, somewhat unstructured mentoring relationship, or are you going to do something like sign a mentoring agreement and agree that these things that are listed here, write them out and actually have something that is more formalized and potentially signed by both parties? And we do have something on the UNAVCO website that you might be able to use if you're interested in that. So when you get together with your mentee, what do you discuss? We showed this slide to the mentees last week just to prompt them a little bit about what topics they might want to talk about with a mentor. Again, the goals. It's so important to establish those goals and know what you are working toward. You may want to talk about ideas for career plans. These relationships are typically professional and helping the mentee develop professionally. So it's good to know what they're looking for. You know, maybe 5 years out, or depending on where they are in their career, it might just be next year. Do I go to grad school? Do I not? So talk about different ideas for career plans. Again, outline how the relationship should take place. Make sure you establish the norms. It's very, very important to understand how you're going to interact. And then as things come up, as your mentee brings challenges to you, it's important to talk about those challenges and reflect on your experience and potentially provide some insight on how you navigated different challenges, or just some guidance for your mentee. If a mentee has a challenge that you don't necessarily know how to address, you may want to have them talk to someone else if you know of a good other person or a good potential second mentor for them. Just think about your resources and how to address different challenges. And also, for sure, talk about opportunities that you may know of and be able to share with your mentee. If they bring an opportunity to you, think about how that opportunity might help them or help them work through if it's something that they should pursue.
Right, and last week when we did the webinar focused on being a good mentee, one of the things that we really tried to emphasize was that the mentee should really share information with their mentors on a regular basis. And I use the phrase sort of like toot your own horn, right? Like really share your success. We want the mentees to share their successes with the mentors. And the reason that as a mentor you would want them to do that is the more that you know about what your mentee is doing and what kind of things they're interested in, you tuck that away in the back of your mind, and as different opportunities arise, you can share those with your mentee. And so, you know, I think that's another element that's really important when you're setting up the expectations and what you want to get out of this mentoring relationship, is to really encourage your mentee to communicate frequently and share things that maybe they don't think are notable or super important, but that are related to the mentoring relationship. And oftentimes I think a lot of us go to a faculty-student relationship, but again, I really want to take us back to thinking about other people in the professional workplace, in private sector, industry, government work, especially early career folks who might be making 5-year career plans, or a mid-career person who might be looking at, like, where do I want to be in 5 years? So just a couple of words about mentoring beyond students. So really thinking outside of that student box. If you're mentoring someone who's early career or mid-career, you're very busy, they are very busy trying to establish their own career. Balancing time becomes really challenging. And earlier we touched on the, trying to figure out how much time to spend, how to establish boundaries that work for both of you. It can be more challenging when you're working with a mentee that is not a student, just because the demands on time for both of you, the mentor and the mentee, are a little bit more strict. The other thing that we would be remiss in not mentioning, but that we can't really cover in this webinar, because really this could be a whole webinar in and of itself, is looking at diversity in mentoring. And this is recognizing all types of diversity, and it's important in any relationship, and especially in a mentoring relationship. And diversity here could be ethnic diversity, gender, socioeconomic status. It's really important to kind of keep in mind that your own personal experience and your identity differs from your mentee, and you don't necessarily know all the different aspects of your mentee just from talking to them. If you want to say a few words.
Yes, and it is really important as you're talking to your mentees to just really remember the implicit biases that you may have, and be very aware of those and cognizant of those as you're interacting with your mentees.
Yes, for sure. Another thing to think about is that the mentoring relationship isn't always kind of a junior-senior type relationship. You can actually have peer mentors or near-peer mentors. Here at UNAVCO, we have a lot of summer interns and students that range from community college students to graduate students. And that falls in kind of the near-peer mentoring category, where they learn from each other. They're at a very similar stage in their careers. You in your own workplace may have a peer mentoring situation if you're in academia, or even if you're in a new position in government or industry. Sometimes new employees get matched up with an existing employee, and that would be a peer mentor. So these are all mentoring relationships, and it's important to think about that when we're talking about who you might mentor. The other thing that we wanted to share with you is an abbreviated list of mentoring programs and resources that you should be aware of, and share with your colleagues and check them out if you're not familiar with them. There are more and more resources and programs that are being organized and published online. Very recently, I'm sure that many of you heard about Mentoring 365, which AGU has developed a partnership with SEG and AWG, where mentors and mentees can go online and sign up to become mentored or mentor for a 3-month time period initially. GSA also has mentoring programs. We didn't list it here. AMS also has mentoring programs. They're not quite on one page like GSA and AGU. Aisha mentioned Pathways to Science. They actually have a mentoring manual online, and if you just go to the pathways-to-science.org website, you can search for it, and it's very comprehensive. More focused on academia would be the Carleton College Science Education Resource Center. They have mentoring resources in a portion of the CERC website. And then the Council for Undergraduate Research has a mentor network largely focused on mentoring undergraduates doing research, but a lot of the tips and suggestions and things that are there would be applicable in different types of mentoring relationships. And then we also wanted to point out that on our UNAVCO website, we do have a page about mentoring, and in particular, we do have some documents, some worksheets that could be used with a mentor. If you're the kind of person that really likes to have a little bit more structure when you're going into a conversation with a mentee, using the intentional mentoring worksheet is a really great way to do that, because it's a guide, and it kind of gives you a roadmap to how to move forward. So with that, we'll kind of conclude our slides. Since we are all in the science industry, and we know that everyone loves evidence, here's some select references that you might be interested in, some of the seminal work that's been done on mentoring. And this really is a very small subset of all the work that's been done. So with that, we'd like to thank everyone, and then if there's any questions, I think we have some time to answer them. Yeah.
We certainly have time. Thank you so much, Donna and Aisha. It was an engaging and informative presentation. We really appreciate you guys joining us today. So we have a few questions already in the questions box for all of our attendees. If you have any questions, just navigate over to the right side panel, and you can ask us your specific questions. So there have been a few people who have talked about differences in communication styles, and what do you think, Aisha and Donna, is a good way to kind of overcome? Maybe someone needs a lot of positive reinforcement, and while you're constructive, maybe you are not quite meeting the amount of positivity that they need. How is a way that a mentor can maybe deal with something like that?
That's a great question, and I think that that's especially important when you're dealing with people who are new to kind of geosciences generally, and you're trying to help guide them, and they're not very confident, if you will. One thing that I like to do is to try to point individuals to other resources that exist. So I usually do a little bit of research myself, and if they're looking to, if they need some guidance in terms of how to be more confident or communication styles, actually giving them some resources to go and read about it and learn a little bit about it is kind of, I think, one of the easier things to do.
Yeah, I think resources are fantastic ways to get someone informed about what they may not necessarily know is happening and is an issue. And I think also when you are interacting, I think it might be important to just ask, how are you feeling about our interactions? How could I communicate better with you? This is my style. It might be worth having, again, that kind of a conversation about expectations and that evaluation about how things are going. Because different people do need different levels of positive reinforcement, or for some people that might seem obnoxious and please stop telling me things and, blowing smoke. So I think it is important to have that conversation too, because in a very welcoming way, not in a tell me how I'm doing an awesome job, and I think that could be intimidating.
Definitely. And I've seen this in actually some of my bosses. Some of the most effective bosses that I have actually had different communication styles for each of the employees. And that's a learned skill, definitely. Someone has actually asked if you guys could navigate back to the last slide with the resources.
Oh, the references?
Yeah, the references, sorry.
Oh.
Perfect. So who is in charge in a mentor and mentee relationship of reaching out? You want to make sure that the mentee is being independent. They could be intimidated. So how do you kind of navigate who should reach out when?
I try to tell mentees that they are owning this relationship. Essentially, they're the ones trying to get something out of it. So I think it is important for mentees to reach out. I think it is also very important for mentors to respond as soon as possible when the mentees reach out, because if they do try to reach out and they don't get an answer for 2, 3, 4 weeks, that's going to be a deterrent to them reaching out. I think it is important for mentors to check in with the mentees, but I think that the mentees are the ones seeking to gain something specific out of this relationship. So I encourage them to try to own it.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that if as a mentor, you're just in a period where you're really busy, and you don't really have time to fully respond to the mentee, if they send an email or leave a voicemail, just a quick response, acknowledging, I did get your message, I got your email, I'm really busy the next 2 weeks, and I will follow up with you afterwards, and then put something on your calendar so you remember to do that. You don't have to address the entire issue and detract from other things that you might have going on. The other thing that I think is important, and it goes back to Aisha's point about communication, is that sometimes if a mentee does reach out and they have a very long list or they want a lot of information about things, it's your opportunity really to set those boundaries and say, look, I'm really happy to help you with X, but I can't do Y and Z. It's just, it's not a good fit with my skill set, or at this time I'm just not going to have the time that I would like to devote to you. But really, I think the onus, I would agree with Aisha, the onus is primarily on the mentee, and it's a good skill set for them to develop.
I think it's great advice. One of the questions we got from the mentee webinar last week was about anxiety. So what if your mentee is having trouble reaching out to you? How do you teach a mentee to start those conversations or to advocate for themselves if you can tell that they're shy, quiet, or reserved, or maybe even anxious?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's difficult, right? Because we don't always know why a particular mentee might be anxious. And so part of being able to address that would be, knowing your mentee, and having some just really frank conversations with them.
I think, yeah, those frank conversations are going to be key, and I think that's also where it's very important to be very intentional in your conversations with them and in your interactions to say and demonstrate that you're there for them, that you're there to help them. And maybe you don't want to have a conversation where they're sitting across from you at a desk. Maybe you want to go get coffee and just find out more about their life and their experiences and maybe past experiences. Maybe they've had a mentor in the past, or they've had interactions that have given them a little bit of anxiety, and maybe you can help alleviate some of those concerns by making sure you don't do what has happened before. Things like not answering the emails, or acting as though the mentee's bothering you by reaching out. And I think it's just really important to be welcoming and to encourage that mentee that you're there to help them, and model the behavior too. If you are trying to explain to them that they need to advocate for themselves, maybe you model that behavior yourself. Especially if you're another shy person, because I know a lot of us are a little bit more introverted in the field, and so maybe you can talk about your experience if you've had a similar experience, or if you know someone who has and they've overcome it, maybe that might be a nice time to broaden their network by introducing them to that person as well.
Right, and I think the other thing that I'll add to that is that different people have different levels of confidence and different levels of anxiety, and an initial conversation with people, sometimes you can gauge people and whether it might be a good fit or not. And for those mentees who might be very anxious, sometimes they do require a little bit more time, and that's just important for you as a mentor to think about, and try to balance what you feel like you're required to do because of maybe your particular position. Maybe you have to do some mentoring as part of your professional job, but balancing that with the time that you really have available. So if you end up having 3 individuals that you're mentors for, and all of them require kind of a lot of attention, you may have to rethink that and try to find others to help with those mentoring relationships.
Great. Someone here is asking if you have any advice for setting up a mentor program at an institution or university.
Well, just off the top of my head, the first thing that I would do is I'd clearly identify what is the goal. Why do you want to set up a mentoring program at a particular institution or organization? And that has to be really clear, and know what kind of outcomes you might want from that, because you can put a lot of resources into a program and not really achieve what you're hoping to achieve if you're not really intentional and deliberate with that. So I think that would be the very first thing, is making sure that you know exactly what it is that you want to achieve. And the other thing is that I think once you have that in place and you know what you want to achieve, you know what the outcomes are going to be, you know what kind of funding you might have available to resource it, that's really important. Then to make sure that you get buy-in from whoever the final decision makers are. So that's just kind of from an administrative standpoint. I would say those are really key things to do. I don't know if Aisha's got thoughts on practical aspects.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. My first thought was, who do you want to be mentored and why? So Donna covered that. I think it's also very important to, with that buy-in, to ensure that you have people, not just the administrative, but that administrative can encourage the people that you're trying to help facilitate the program. And so those are your human resources. along with your funding type resources. I think knowing I know we said mentoring literature is very widespread and not super specific about exactly what mentoring is, but I think understanding what some of the best practices are and having some resources in your back pocket for helping facilitate a program. Because you definitely will want a champion who kind of knows what they're doing and can help you make it happen.
Right. And one thing to add to what Aisha said is that it's really important to make sure that the decision makers and all the staff who would be involved in the mentoring program are on board. If you don't have kind of buy-in from the entire organization, what it ends up being is another thing that people have to do. And as we talked about at the very beginning of the webinar, that these are mentoring relationships because people want to see each other succeed, and that they're really mutually agreed upon and beneficial relationships. And so it's really important to make sure that when you're designing this and whatever outcomes you want, that you have buy-in from everyone so that people don't feel like, oh, this is one more thing that I have to do when I go to work.
Definitely. So someone has been running an REU program for a while, and they think that oftentimes, especially for undergraduates, it's really hard for students earlier in their career to actually identify what they need help with. So what if someone, a student, one doesn't know what they need, or someone maybe that thinks they know exactly what they need, but someone who's more experienced in that career path knows that actually that's not such a big deal to achieve your goals. We should probably work on this. How might a mentor navigate that?
So I think for the first case of students who don't know what they need, I think that's where those conversations about what are you interested in, what inspires you, to kind of try to narrow down what it is a student is really looking to do. And I know a lot of students are interested in everything, and everything is cool, and I want to do everything, but the reality is you probably aren't going to do everything in your lifetime. You probably will do a whole lot, but what are the things that are really going to make you get out of bed in the morning, that are going to make you want to go to school for a lot of years, potentially? I think it's important for a mentor to just have that conversation, and maybe it's not even a mentor relationship at that point. Maybe it's just coffee with someone who has some more experience in a particular field. Maybe it's more of an informational type interview. But I think it's key to get at what is driving a student to do things, whatever those things are, and try to identify that and help them figure out where they may want to go. And make sure they also understand you are not locked into anything at any point. A lot of people like to say, the things that happen to you are not commas, or are not periods, they're commas, and the story continues. So I think that's important for students to understand as well.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
How might a mentor balance trying to guide a mentee versus trying to instill and teach independence in their mentee?
Wow, these are incredible questions. Guide versus teach. I think you have us a little stumped.
And instilling independence.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it might come down to a mentee. Sometimes mentees, like the previous question asked, they don't even know what they want. So it's hard to be independent if you don't know where you're going or what you're trying to do. So I think helping guide them a little bit into figuring out what it is they want to do, and helping give them the resources and the capital and the network to start to pursue those things. And then I'm not a parent, but I think in my mind this is how parenting works. And then you instill in them, that give them the tools that they need to be successful, and then you let them start stepping out on their own. And there may be stumbles, but you reevaluate, reassess, and help them navigate those stumbles.
I think that's very fair. One of the other things that I feel like when I'm mentoring someone is my responsibility is if you know, you try to give them the tools, you kind of set them out. If you see that they are going in a direction that really is not a good direction, or you know, they're going to end up in a situation that may compromise their ability to do other things, you know, kind of pulling them back in and saying, you know, actually, let's look at this. Maybe we should readjust. Because I think the other thing that's important as a mentor is that you want to really convey that you're here to help them and guide them, and you do have some knowledge, but you don't know everything. And so it's a little bit of, you could almost think of it as you're helping them explore and navigate, and part of what you're doing as a mentor is also figuring out how to help them navigate, because you know, often these relationships kind of evolve and are a little bit organic. And as a mentor, you shouldn't think that, you know, well, I'm going in and I have all the answers and I know what I need to do. It's really, you know, knowledge evolves just like with everything else.
Definitely. I have two questions that I'm going to try and fit in the last couple minutes. We'll see if we can get to them both. So if you realize that you're not necessarily the best match for the mentee, you have tried to accommodate their communication styles, maybe your research background is different than their goals, and you really think that you're not the best mentor, you're not going to give them all of the skills that they're looking for, how do you break up with a mentee?
That is a really important question. Yeah, we talked about this, Leslie, as you know, a little bit with the mentees. That happens. It's not, sometimes it's not a good match, and breaking up is hard to do. But I think, you know, as we've tried to emphasize, really having some really honest communication is really important. And what I like to do is, if it's clear that I'm not going to be a good fit with this mentee, I try to find someone else that I could introduce them to. Or multiple people. Perhaps it's really, you know, too big of a job for one person. And the beauty of the age that we live in is that those mentors don't have to be physically co-located. And so you could introduce them and they could meet over Skype. So that's usually my, what I found has been most successful.
I agree.
All right, so this is a repeat question from the mentee webinar. What is the biggest barrier to mentoring, and how can I, as a mentor, overcome that barrier?
I mean, I think that barrier is often communication. I think it's often very hard for some. But we talked about the anxiety question earlier. It's hard for some people to reach out. It's intimidating, it's challenging, and I think our answer to the mentees was reach out. And I think for the mentors, I think it's also important to encourage your mentee to reach out, and again, make sure you are responding when they actually try to contact you. And if, as Donna mentioned, even if that response is, I have a really, you know, full plate right now, but let's touch base in X days or a week or so.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say the biggest challenge is time and balancing, but then when Aisha said communication, I was like, actually that is, because if you are having trouble fitting things in with time, the way to overcome that is through communication. So I would say that time and balancing your efforts with work and other commitments is a close second to the communication.
Well, thank you so much, Donna and Aisha. It's been a really great webinar, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and share all of your knowledge about mentoring. And thank you to our audience for joining today's presentation. And keep an eye out for a follow-up email, and we'll include links to the webinar recording as well as some additional resources, including a link to the mentee recording that we did last week. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.